At the studio of Kitchen Theory today, I am honored to have Roberto Revilla from Roberto Revilla London, bespoke tailors and shoemakers and host of Tailoring Talk podcast. Roberto, thank you so much for taking the time to come in and join us at the studio.
You're so welcome. I've been so excited about today. So thank you for having me. Also, it's kind of weird not eating here.
Well, you came for dinner a couple of weeks ago, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And you'd been for dinner in our previous space in North London.
Yes.
And when you and I first started, well, I got to know you when you came for dinner that evening, I think instantly there was a kind of connection there on a kind of craft and artistry level. And immediately I could see that we had a kind of shared passion for not only the kind of craftsmanship and artistry, but also the delivery, the experience of what it is that we do in our respective fields. And I think maybe for some people watching or listening to this, they may think, why on earth, what's a chef and a tailor doing, talking to each other about, food and multi-sensory experiences? But I think there's actually loads of similarities in our worlds. And we were chatting about this, or we've talked about it a few times in the past. And I think there's something about, aside from, the years and years of craft and honing your craft that it takes to produce the beautiful pieces that you do for people, there are so many other similar or parallels or similarities in our worlds. Like for us, it's maybe choosing great quality ingredients, which for you would be, choosing great quality fabrics. There's, let's say, cutting a pattern, whereas for us, it's developing a recipe. And I kind of feel like there's an endless number of similarities in what we do. And you're a big foodie as well, right?
Yeah, very much so.
Now, when it comes to tailoring, what would you say are the kind of real essence of what makes a great finished product for you?
I don't know if I'm ever going to answer any question you ask me directly or in the proper way, or even in a short way.
Don't
Never
worry.
happens on my podcast either. For me, so the reason I got into tailoring is because I love clothes. I love I'm very interested in the impact that clothes have on the individual and what it does to the way that they feel about themselves and the way that people react to them depending on the way that they're dressed. So that interested me from quite a young age, because I've been 6 foot from a young age, so I was a really fast growing kid. And being from a get your tiny violins out poor background, my mum and dad couldn't afford to keep buying me new school uniform every few months. And so my mum would raid my dad's closet from when he was younger and pull out his clothes and get me to wear those to school. And my dad kind of grew up in the 70s, and I was a kid going to school in the late 80s. And and also being an ethnic minority in a predominantly white school at the time, I had a big enough target on my back as it was. And then wearing bell bottoms to school when it was all straight leg fashion and so on just meant I just got absolutely beaten up all the time. And so out of desperation, I would sneak into my mum's, we had a box room and that's where she kept her sewing machine. And so I just took a pair of scissors to my trousers to try and reduce the width of the bottom, and sewed it back together really badly. But when I went back to school next day, I was back to just getting beaten up for being an ethnic minority kid rather than for what I was wearing. Yeah. But that's when I started to make the connection between, hang on a second, I looked one way the day before and that's how people were treating me. But now I'm dressed, I've made an alteration to literally made an alteration to how I'm dressed today, and people are treating me slightly differently. And then when I eventually got to sixth form college and I got a part-time job and I was able to start earning some money to start buying my own clothes and experimenting, I could kind of see those impact connections, etc., even more. And I meet a lot of people who've had tailors before. And I've got a lot of clients who, before they met me, they had tailors previously and they didn't get on with them for whatever reason, whether it was the quality of the clothes or the fit, or the tailor wasn't quite getting what they wanted in terms of style. And so for me, the most important thing when I meet someone new, and even with clients that I've worked with for a long time, because we all change as we progress in our careers and we get older and all of that sort of stuff. For me, I've got to know the person. I've got to get to know the person before I can dress them. And as long as I do that, the rest takes care of itself. Whatever I produce for that individual based on what I know about them, when they put it on for the first time, it either feels like them or it feels like the person that they aspire to be. They feel like they're dressed the way they want to present themselves to the world. So I don't know if that makes sense, but
No, 100%.
it comes from a different starting point maybe to where it would for most people in my profession, even yours to an extent.
So if we were to map out, let's say, for example, creating a dish and creating a tailored bespoke suit. So we start, at least at Kitchen Theory, with that overall concept. So what's the story that we're trying to tell? Is that similar in your case?
Yeah, it's the same, because the thing is that in our respective professions, people would, so you quite rightly said earlier, ingredients. For you, it's things that you can eat, edible things, spices and animals and vegetables and things. And for me, it's fabric, and it's, the accessories that we use, like buttons and things, and the materials that those things are made of. And so a lot of people assume that as a bespoke tailor or fashion designer or a chef, that you start from the ingredients, like you go out and you find ingredients and you try and create a dish out of it. When you come from a concept perspective, so for you, it's, you think of a concept.
Well, it could be sustainability.
Yeah.
For example, or it could even be that the concept is around the season, right? And maybe for some chefs, they inadvertently, because some chefs will say, oh no, I go by, the ingredients and that's the story. Yeah, but you're telling the story of the seasons, aren't you, by in doing that? But it's just that I guess we're aware of that step before selecting ingredients. We think, right, what's the story that we're trying to tell?
Yeah.
How do you develop those stories? Is it through getting to know your clients and their characters? Does it change a lot from story to story?
So I work for individuals rather than tables of people.
Sure.
And so for me, the story is different. So if I'm seeing 5 or 6 people a day, the story is different 5 or 6 times over, because every individual is different. So I'm trying to get what the concept or what the story of this person is. When other people look at you for the first time, in those first few seconds, what's the story that we need them to get? What do they need to think about you? What do they need to know about you? What do they need to say, oh, he's whatever it is that you and I work out that needs to be? And then that's where it all starts from.
Okay. So now, let's say in our case, we've developed our concept. We know that we want to talk about, let's say, for example, sustainability. In your case, you've spoken to your client, you've ascertained maybe the occasion. I guess that makes a huge difference, right?
Yeah,
Whether you're
weddings.
going to,
Right now, we're deep into wedding season.
Yeah. I guess whether it's going to a wedding, whether it's going to Ascot, whether it's a business suit, all of these things are going to heavily influence that narrative, right, that you're going through. Then I guess after that, for us, it comes down to, once we've kind of fleshed out what that concept is, it's looking at that, as you said, that next step, which is, for us, it's the ingredients, in which case for you it would be the fabrics. So how are the fabrics, your selection of that, how, and not just the fabrics, obviously, but the, as you said, the buttons, maybe the thread, how does all of that start to come together then once you've got that story?
So I'm smiling to mask my, what's the word? Slight fear, because what I've realized is that a lot of this is really instinctive.
Oh, right.
So very often someone will walk into my workroom or I'll walk into their space, and within the first 5 seconds when I look them up and down, I'm drafting what I want to do with that person, and it's very instinctive. So it's really, really hard for me to actually break down the process of that. I'll try and give it a go though. So clap eyes on someone for the first time. I almost have done my first draft
Sure.
in my own mind. And also I always, when I'm going to meet someone that I don't know, I will always have what we call an icebreaker call, where I get them on the phone. And apparently I'm finding out more and more that a lot of my peers don't do this, but I insist on having a phone conversation with every new person before I meet them, so that I can actually get to know them a little bit over the phone. You can tell a lot from someone by listening to the way they speak, their intonation, what's going on in the background, how stressed out they may or may not sound. When you ask someone the question, so tell me about you and what you do, that question reveals a lot, because people can answer it in really one of two ways. Either they say, well, I'm a bespoke tailor and I make clothes for people and I run around after busy people. Or they can say, well, I like to spend a lot of my spare time walking my dogs and being out in the countryside and stuff when I'm not actually doing and that tells you what's most important to them as well. And then you get a sense of their personality type. Are they analytical? Are they quite an amiable person? Are they potentially quite outgoing? Are they introvert? Are they extrovert? So I get all of this information on the first call. And then when they come in and I actually see them for the first time, this rough draft of everything is taking place in my mind. And then it's about sitting down together, fleshing out some more detail, asking them, since we spoke, is there anything that you've been thinking about, anything that's been on your mind, any ideas about where you would like to start, what's most important to you? Because I don't really matter at this point in time. And then once they've answered that question and we've got to have a bit more of a conversation about things, then I can see the whole thing. I can see the final result in my mind. And then I just turn around to where all my fabrics are. And then I'm on autopilot. We need bamboo because where they're traveling to, or the climate that they operate in, is very warm and humid. So they need fabrics that are going to be thermoregulating, and, sweat's going to disperse easily and it's not going to smell because, bamboo, is just as an example, has natural antibacterial qualities as well. Sure. For trousers, he's got quite big thighs and he likes movement. So we need fabrics that have got some natural stretch woven in. And in terms of colors, again, that's another thing. So there's so much going on at once, because again, color is a very instinctive thing because it depends on the individual. And when you look at someone, most people have either got a blue or a yellow undertone to their skin, and that will drive a lot of the colors that they're going to feel the most confident in. So for example, I've got a blue undertone to my skin. So for me, colors of winter is like my wheelhouse. So deep navies and blacks and grays. And then with shirts and things, ice colors are always my best things, like ice pinks and blues and whites, obviously, but things that have got a bit more of a yellow undertone in their color. So deep foresty greens are better for me than mustardy greens, if that makes sense. Sure. And every individual has their color palette. And when people learn what their colors are, there's a light bulb moment at some point, because you say to them, now we've just been through all of this. Now think about your wardrobe at home and think about the clothes that you wear the most, and think about items that you bought that you thought, that looks nice, I'm not sure, but they probably fall out of your base color spectrum. And people have this light bulb moment and they're like, oh my God, yeah, you're absolutely right. And then I try to take it a step further with them and explain to them that everything that's happened up to this point has largely been based on my instinct. Everybody has that instinct as well. Help them to tune into it.
Sure.
And then by the time you've gone through all of this stuff, the measuring up and the final selection.
Oh, well, before we get to that.
Oh, yeah,
so
sure.
you piqued my interest with something which is talking about those kind of the cloths. So when you're selecting these materials, and I was thinking, is there a seasonality to this as well? So, with food, it's very seasonal, right? It's like hyper seasonal to some degree. But I'm just thinking there must be an element of that as well in tailoring where you're not just designing this suit for, any time. There must be, I'm guessing, different weights and textures of fabrics that work better for certain times of year.
Absolutely. So you very rarely sell tweed in summer because it's hot and tweed is very heavy.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, this is where getting to know your client comes into it, because sometimes you meet someone who is constantly flying around the world. So they're not actually dictated, their life is not dictated by what's going on here in the UK.
Right.
It's dictated by where they spend a lot of their time. So if there's someone who does business out in Asia, the Middle East and places like that, well, they're in a hot climate all the time. So seasonality doesn't quite come into it so much. But again, you've got to get to know them and you've got to ask all these questions and get this out of them to then be able to make those recommendations.
Okay.
And then by the time all of this has happened, the making of the product and so on is kind of like it's like a thing that then just happens. And then the next thing from the customer perspective is when they come in and they try everything on and everything that we talked about conceptually suddenly comes to life, comes to reality the moment that they slip into the garment for the first time.
I want to ask you something around that. But before we get to that, so we've got our story, we've got now our ingredients that have all come together. Is this where the next step for us is starting to actually craft this and starting to actually say, right, how do we put this together? How do we balance these flavors? So, we obviously, if we want to have, most chefs now, even most home cooks now, will understand that it's about balancing both the tastes and the textures in the dish. So you don't want a dish that's really kind of mushy, and you want some kind of bite and crunch and something that contrast is important, both in terms of texture and in terms of flavors. How does that translate into, I'm sure that must come into looking at maybe the different fabrics that you use within the suit, then the different elements and the details like the buttons, the buttonholes, and because I've seen some of the beautiful pieces that you produce and there's so much detail that goes in there. So what about that next step then in terms of that craft?
So, and again, a lot of this is really instinctive, which is why I raise my eyes to the heavens, trying to then deconstruct what I'm doing. But I mean, take today, for example. So I was just drafting a pattern for a client who's lost a ton of weight. Well done him. And he commissioned a beautiful tan bamboo jacket because he saw a picture of me in a lavender one that I posted on Instagram recently. And on the surface, it's a tan jacket, like, so what? But if you put, and we actually do have not a microscope, but one of those eyeglasses in the workroom. If you put your eye to the fabric and you really look inside it, it's not just tan. There's white, there's rust, there's deep browns, there's chestnut, there's almost a rare steak in there as well. When you cut through the center of a rare steaks, there's some little flashes of those colors in there as well. And so you've got, an abundance of different colors of threads and things, but you need to decide which color element within the fabric you're then going to bring out with the thread that you use for your buttonholes. And then what color of button is going to complement that, and what material as well, because obviously some button materials, when you use nut buttons, they tend to be quite shiny. Horn buttons tend to be kind of matte texture. But again, I'm so sorry if I'm not doing a great job of actually directly answering the question, because I'm
curious then. So let's say how in that context, and I'm really interested to understand, how do balance and contrast work for you? Like when designing these pieces, how do you factor those elements in? What does that mean in the world of tailoring?
Well, you take buttons, for example. So people take buttons for granted. Like they're a thing that you need to have on your garment to be able to do it up, right? And again, a lot of people, they use and when I say people, I mean my peers, they just use the same button sets all the time for everything. It doesn't really, it might be black or navy or gray, but there's not really much outside of that. We've got so many different buttons in different textures and things, and you get buttons that are a completely block color, and you get others like marble buttons that have got lots of the different little swells. Marble buttons are heavy. Nut buttons tend to be a little bit thinner and flatter. And so you have to think about all these things as well. But then it's not just fabric, it's the person that's actually in the clothes. Because if I've got a skinny guy that's bought a tweed suit, I'm not necessarily going to put a really heavy button, even though it's a heavier fabric. I might have to use a medium-sized button, so I've got some balance between the person in the outfit and the actual material the outfit's made of. If I've got a really, really big, powerfully built guy who's in a heavy fabric, then I'm probably going to use like one of our thickest marbled buttons because they've got a real heavy look to them. And that complements not just the fabric that we've used, which is wintry and it's heavy, but also the guy himself is really, really big. So I'm not going to just use a button that's flat and thin, because again, that's going to unbalance him as well. And this is all stuff that I'm thinking about. I try to make the customer aware of it, although half the time, to be quite honest, they don't really care. But where this is important is when that person is seen by everybody else. So if it's a groom at his wedding, everyone's looking at him. They can see the obvious stuff, like he's wearing a well-tailored, well-cut, the colors all work for him and so on. But there's other stuff, there's small, tiny little details in their outfit that they don't understand why it works, but the whole thing just sings.
And what about contrast? Because I'm sure that must play a role as well in terms of colors, textures, fabrics. Is contrast something, and how does that work? And because for us, that's obviously really important on a plate. Like you were talking about balance. Balance is really important, but so is contrast as well. Because you want, in a way, I think of flavor pairing almost like how you will pair maybe certain fabrics together that work well together, that hang and sit well together in the same way that we would look for the way flavors pair well together. But at the same time, you want certain element of flavor pairing, but you also want certain element of contrast there. And what does that look like in tailoring?
So for fabrics, that is seasonal. So, the fabrics of summer are cotton and linen and bamboo, and the things that we think of immediately, we think of as not being processed, as being natural fabrics. And then when you get to winter, you think winter's cold, so you want warmth. Therefore, fabrics need to be heavier and warmer, and they need to be able to retain heat. So then you think of sheep, because they tend to hang out on mountains where it's really freezing cold and they have their woolly coats. Well, wool is the natural fabric that we're going to go for. Don't really make things out of linen and cotton and things like that in winter. But then color is the other thing, especially in this day and age where people aren't generally wearing suits as much as they used to, which are just one color with a contrast in the shirt. They're wearing different jacket trouser combinations and so on, so a bit more smart casual. And so then you're more into color. And the thing for me with contrasting colors, the golden rule that I go by is that if it works when you look out of your window and you see it in nature, it will work when you put it together in your clothes. And so we're doing a lot of greens, a lot of green jackets at the moment. And people are like, oh, what's that going to go with? And you go, well, look out the window. Because green is one of the dominant colors that we see outside, whether you're in the countryside or you're in the city. So what goes with green? And they're like, oh, well then brown would go. Yes, trees. The sky, yeah, because you always see green and sky blue meeting each other. Gray, because it's very cloudy here all the time. And we've got a lot of concrete in London as well. But then there are so many colors of flower that work with green, because you see so many flowers around in so many different colors, reds and oranges and greens and pinks and whatnot. You never ever look at that and think, God got that flower a bit wrong. They just work.
So what you're saying here is Mother Nature is the true artist.
Definitely.
And that echoes the sentiments of a very well-known chef called Marco Pierre White. And he was known for saying that about his food, which is Mother Nature is the true artist. And really it's about us as chefs taking these wonderful God-given natural products and doing something fascinating and yet simple, and allowing that kind of natural inspiration to still shine through in some way.
Yeah.
And that's fascinating that that translates in some way into how you go about color selection.
I think Nigel Slater said as well, what grows together goes together.
Sure.
Yeah, because that always sticks out in my mind, because I always used to take the mick out of him and do an impression of him for my wife because she found it hilarious. Because in all of his shows, he seems to go nicking herbs from people's gardens when he's talking to them. But that's one thing that he said that really stood out to me. What grows together goes together.
And in terms of now, we've talked about building up this story, that concept for, in our case, the dish, in your case, the client that you have, and understanding, who they are, what kind of persona character they have, and that they want to portray and feel in, these beautiful suits that you create for them. We've touched on how we select ingredients in our case, or fabrics in your case. We've talked a little bit about this idea of craft, but I'm interested to understand, so that dexterity that you start to develop with how you hold the knife, how when you're filleting a fish, your first salmon that you fillet is not going to be the same as the 1,000th salmon that you fillet in terms of the accuracy, your knowledge of where the bones are, where to make the incisions. What you'll tend to find when people are filleting a fish the first time is they'll make loads and loads of strokes, whereas by the time you master it, you're able to take the fillet off in maybe 2 to 3 strokes would be where you're starting to get into that territory of mastering that skill. How does that translate into that feel that you have to have in the hands, and that ability to not only be able to conceptualize what you want to create, but the actual ability to be able to do that with your hands? How does that translate into your world?
So for me personally, with what we do at Roberto Revilla London, I'm a designer, interior designer, architect, project manager. What else did I do? Quantity surveyor. So I do all of that stuff, but I don't lay bricks. I've got an amazing team around me. And so they take all these plans and concepts and they take all of that and then they translate it into the finished product. So when I first started, my desk at work, because I worked for a much bigger tailors once upon a time, was full of biographies of famous chefs.
Really?
Yeah. There weren't business biographies. Lots of books, like Gordon Ramsay's biographies, etc. And I was just fascinated by that world. I was fascinated, first of all, by how hard it was for them going through training and so on, and the hours they would have to put in for very little money, the abuse that a lot of chefs would take as well. I mean, quite frankly, I don't know why anyone would. I mean, you'd have to be so passionate that this is what you want to do in life, that this was your purpose, this is your calling, to go through all of that to then maybe not even be successful, because obviously not many chefs make it. And that always fascinated me. What also fascinated me was how kitchens ran, that you would have a head chef and then he'd have his pastry chef and his sous chef and all these other people, and even down to the person that was responsible for making sure that the cutlery was perfect and all of that. And so I thought eventually, when I went to do this for myself, that I'd want to try to emulate some of that, if not all of that. And I always saw myself as being the conceptual person, being the head chef, being front of house as well, because where I get the biggest buzz is working with my clients, serving them that plate of food and then letting them take that bite. And again, you need to translate this back to presenting them with their new suit or their new jacket or set of shirts or whatever, and then helping them into it. And then seeing that reaction as they take that first bite, when the jacket first goes on their shoulders and they look in the mirror, straighten up and so on. And that I would need to have a team of people working with me who were the artists, that were excellent on the bench with the scissors, etc., that could put this stuff together for me. So in my part of my world, that's how it works. It is very much emulating, or trying at least to emulate, what the best chefs do and the best kitchens and how the best kitchens run. Whenever we've had a special occasion to celebrate, my wife and I'll always try to do chef's table instead of just booking a table at a nice restaurant.
Sure.
Because I will want to sit there and just observe and soak in what they're doing. So yeah.
Oh, and I feel like I've done us a disservice and I've missed a step. So before you actually get to crafting this piece, there's the pattern, right? Like in our case, there's the recipe. So first of all, you have this narrative or story or concept. Then you have the ingredients or the fabric. Then you have the pattern, or in our case, the recipe. And how does that part work for you?
So when I'm measuring someone for the first time, I always say to my customer, I'm going to measure you now, which is going to be less fun for you and more fun for me. And I'm just going to warn you that I talk to myself out loud during this process. And I'm going to say some stuff that is going to make you feel really self-conscious, but I'm not really that aware of it. And what I'm doing is I'm starting to work out how I'm going to deal with your pattern and create, basically create your pattern, because people are odd. Like we come out of the womb, we're not symmetrical.
Sure.
Right? We're all over. Some of my clients are definitely all over the place. Some people, especially the ones that are in good shape, they're a little bit more kind of, asymmetrical.
Sure.
But most people just aren't. One shoulder's more wonky than the other. We get injuries as we go through life. People have curvatures in their spine as well that affects things, gives them a raised hip on one side and so on. And my job is to basically try and balance them. Some people are overweight and they really struggle to get into shape, but they want to look slimmer. Some people are very, very skinny. God knows I'm doing some weddings for some people who are, we say chicken chests. I don't think chickens actually, if you think about chicken breasts, they're not actually flat and concave, but these guys really want to look a bit more filled out. And so it's not just about taking someone's measurements and then putting some clothes together and slinging them on them and sending them on their merry way. It's you've really, really got to think about every part of this person's body, their size, shape, imbalances that they might have, and then how you're going to create. And again, it's all very instinctive. So I'm doing such a bad job of answering your question, probably, but it is just so instinctive. And so there's this probably hundreds, if not thousands of different processes that are going on where anyone looking at me from the outside is just seeing a guy with a tape measure, wrapping it around someone and writing things down and talking out loud, saying really, really weird things like, okay, he holds his arms back, so we're going to need to sleeve rotation there, and then his right hip is raised. And you can kind of see that with what he's walked in wearing, that he's a bit wonky, so I'm going to need to balance that up. And then that right shoulder's really stretched out, so definitely we're going to probably need to just put a little bit of extra padding in there and do this and that. So I'm kind of muttering to myself. So anyone looking from the outside is seeing some nutter with the tape that's just taking measurements, but really there's a lot going on.
And I guess in a similar way, when we're putting together recipes for a dish, so we've now got that concept and ingredients, and now it's really about trying to understand how to balance all of this into a recipe and what's the best techniques and how do we bring this together all in the right kind of balance and measure to make sure that it works. Because you can take complementary ingredients, but if you don't balance it all in the right way, then it can just end up being awful. A good example would be, you could do a spicy chicken. You think, oh, spicy chicken is lovely. Well, it depends on how much spice you put before it just becomes unpalatable, right? So, you know that something can work well together, but it really depends on how the recipe that you're going to use to bring these elements together in harmony. Okay, so then we've now crafted this beautiful dish or suit. We do tastings for our clients. So, we have clients who come in and they want to, and this is one of the other interesting things, even linguistically, we talk about bespoke tailored menus. And we're literally borrowing from your industry to be able to explain to people what it is that we do. So, I think that's kind of interesting right there. But when we do this, obviously, people want to come in and try. And so we will do tastings. In your case,
Try 'em.
there you go. And what does that, because for us, you see, the tastings are all about, maybe it works to our palate, but also it's a great way for us to see as well how the service works around it. So the actual practicalities of how we put this out, how it looks, and, how long it takes us to plate up and to put it in front of the guest, and to learn anything kind of early on that we can perhaps refine and tweak and adjust. And obviously to get the client's feedback as well, to see, from their side because essentially, one thing that's very important for me when we're designing bespoke or tailored menus, it's a little bit different with the chef's table, because our chef's table, supper clubs, is really about, well, this is our art and our creativity, and you come to experience that.
Yeah.
Whereas when we're doing bespoke and tailored menus, it's really about you and what you want and your palate. And so the tastings are really important in terms of as well trying to understand whether we've hit that mark, whether you find the food really yummy, and then understanding how we can tweak it to achieve that. What's the trial look like?
So this is where we're probably slightly different. Most guys, they go to someone like me because they don't want to make the decisions.
Okay.
So very often, this is why a lot of people are surprised that I do the icebreaker call, and then when we get together, we don't look at fabrics for like the first 20 minutes or so, because I'm sitting there kind of relaxed like you and I are today, having a conversation with them to get to know them, because I know that when they walk out the door, they want to leave all of that behind. They're then not going to give it much of a second thought until the day I call them and say, hey, we're ready for your try-on. The try-on is the suit or outfit or whatever it is isn't finished. It's in a stage where the client can see a lot of it enough, because most guys, they can't imagine things. They need to see it. So it's enough for them to actually look in the mirror and say, oh, this is what it's going to look like. And then we can then start to look at the things that we know we need to then fix with it.
Right.
Or adjust, or, re-tailor or whatever. It's enough for them to say, the trouser cut looks really, really good, but I would like the bottoms a little bit narrower, or on my waist, it's feeling a little bit loose in this section here, or on the jacket, the shoulders look really, really good, but I'd like it to be a bit tighter through the middle. What's going on in the chest area here? Well, that's your pigeon chest. So, we need to clear some more fabric out the front panels. But it does give them, they can see what we've been talking about, but they probably honestly wouldn't have thought about it that much. Most people come in, I reckon 85% of our clients come in and they say, do you know what? I can't even remember what I ordered.
Oh, no.
And because we serve a slightly different function in that way, where for a lot of our clients, we're a utility, they need to wear clothes. Now, you would think there is a similarity.
I was going to say, wouldn't you say that most people, they need to eat, but surely having a suit made with you is special. But I think you're lucky, though, and I say this in the sense that everyone has an opinion about food, and everyone has a very personalized opinion about food. And I think that this is kind of interesting, actually, because when you think about the feedback that people will give around food, they speak from a place of their own authority, right? They've been eating for, let's say, if you've got someone who's 20, 30 years old, they've been eating for 20, 30 years. They know what is good food. They know what they like. They know how it should taste and how it should be balanced and how it should. And I guess your clients, though, are coming to you knowing that you have a certain mastery that maybe they know they don't have. Whereas in our industry, yes, they may know that we're professional chefs and that they can't quite execute what we do, but nonetheless, everyone has an opinion on their own personal preferences, I guess, in some way.
Yeah, and also, people are spending a lot of money on this stuff, right? Whether it's a dining experience with you guys or it's what we do. So it's a really, really interesting, I've never kind of really thought about it before. But yeah, a lot of people, they don't, I think that's why when I get certain clients, like as one of my clients, and he won't mind me mentioning his name, Alan Tang, I just absolutely love him because he's genuinely interested in the craft. He's a bit like me when I come to Kitchen Theory and I'm like a child because I mean, at the last dinner when you did the bread thing, I won't give it away for anyone that's not been, but if you have, make sure you book a table at KT. It's amazing. But the bread thing,
Yeah.
everyone on the table this time round was like, "Oh, this is how he does it," and I was like, "No, I refuse to. You're telling me Santa Claus doesn't exist? Like, go away, get in the bin." But you know, I have this fascination with everything you do. Every dish that's put in front of us, I'm really looking at it, and when I'm tasting it, I'm trying to work it out. You
Sure.
know, I'm sure though at the same time that you do get the odd person that turns up at Kitchen Theory and goes through the
Oh,
tasting
sure.
menu that's just like, yeah, whatever.
Sure.
Right,
And
there's-
I guess you feel that some of the appreciation is wasted. Yeah, no, that definitely happens.
Yeah,
You
so
do
we-
have that market. Yeah.
Okay, so we have that as well.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
literally like, you got my Amex details, okay, fine. And then when everything's ready, you're so proud. You can't wait to show them and tell them how amazing they look. And they, you know, like, look how amazing you look. Like,
Yeah.
look what I've done. Like, you look, oh my God, you look so good. And they're just like, yeah, okay, got details for the balance? All right, fine. Give me a call in winter. I'll probably need something else. Off they go.
Yeah. I guess in your case, there's an element of the utility of it, that they value that maybe over the experience of it, right?
Time,
Yeah.
right? So we're in the what are we really in the business of? Are we in the business of tailoring? Yeah, that is what we do. That's the tangible product that people give us money, and then this is the product they take, clothes. But you know, the tragedy of it is that for 80% of our customers, and that's not just me, that's probably any bespoke tailor, is that we're giving those people time back, time that they don't have to spend trudging around shops and trying things on and taking time away from the golf course or their kids or whatever. But for the 20% of our customers that have that appreciation, that passion, that are interested in what we do, that they want to know about the intricacies of it, the process, they have that full appreciation for, you know, they're paying us money to do X, and they're really invested in the whole process. And, you know, they're probably the ones that actually then take time to give us a Google review as well, because, you know, they have that same,
Sure.
we create that impact on them in the same way that, you know, I will always say I've had so many great Michelin star level dinners in my life. I've been very fortunate through my adult working life to be able to do that. Can I remember 80% of them? And this is Pareto's principle all over, but can I remember 80% of them? Damn it, I can't. I mean, I know I went to, I won't name them, but the ones that I do remember, the standout one I remember is yours, Kitchen Theory, both times, both in High Barnet and in Holborn. But I mean, how can you not forget that your senses coming alive before you even sit down to dinner? You know, and I guess it's the same kind of in our world as well.
And I think you mentioned an interesting point. You triggered a thought in my mind about this idea of it being a kind of sensory experience that we deliver. But I also find that, you know, with tailoring and your suit, so we feel different based on what we're wearing, and you know, how we smell, the feel of the fabric, the weight of the fabric, the textures, obviously the visuals and the colors and the cut and all these kind of elements. But it is really a sensory experience. I mean, bar taste, let's say. But I think that's an important part of feeling good in what you're wearing, isn't it? And I think even just, you know, when you have a freshly laundered shirt and it has that lovely fresh aroma to it, and you have, you know, a nice crisp shirt and suit on, and there's something about that really does carry into your energy and how you carry yourself, right? And that's what you're in the business of, really, is giving people that experience.
Yeah. Well, that's where, you know, I was so inspired the first time I did Kitchen Theory. And I started to sort of think, how can we bring some of what they do, the wonder of what you do, into our world, and it's starting to tune in a bit more, just really observing people when they're looking at fabrics. So I don't know if you find this, but in our world, some clients will say, I can't really make decisions on my own. My girlfriend and my wife needs to be involved. And I say to them, tongue in cheek, but actually quite serious at the same time, it's going to get really expensive for you. And they'll say, well, no, because I'm still the boss. I just want her to, and I'm like, no, but women are more in tune with how things look and touch and feel. When they get fabric in their hands, guys are like, yeah, it feels all right. Women, when they touch fabrics, for some reason, and this is probably where I need to actually take myself off for a month and really do my research on this to find out why this is, but they feel the difference with fabrics. When I get home, if I'm wearing something new that's from one of my favorite mills, Dorme, who are French design, British made cloth, but in the best mills in this country, and they use the best raw ingredients, she knows immediately. She'll say, Dorme. Yeah. Why do you wear anything else? Just get fabrics from them for yourself all the time. But I have to try different things because I need to know the same way you experiment with different ingredients. Women know, guys don't for some reason. So then when you observe people, so when you put a piece of fabric in front of them, but then you put it under the microscope, so they'll be just like, oh, it's a nice piece of fabric. And you say, okay, now look here. And they're like, really? Okay. Then you start to talk them through the intricacy of the weave, the fact that on the surface, it looks like there's maybe one color with a little bit of texture.
Yeah.
But when you look and you see the intricacy of all these different fibers, fabrics, colors, threads that have been woven together to create this piece of cloth.
Yeah.
And they get into it at that sort of more micro level, that's where the wow starts to happen. That's where you see the magic starting to go off in their brains. And that's where my mind has been going more recently as to how can we what tools can we use to bring that wonder into our business? The one thing we started experimenting with recently, so with shoes, so very passionate about sustainability when it comes to footwear, because there's so much waste in the footwear market. Because you get stores that stock shoes that they don't sell, they end up in landfill, etc. So we do it the other way around. We size our clients' feet and then we build the shoe for them. We design the shoe with them in a virtual space. But we've started experimenting recently rather than doing it on a flat screen on a laptop. Actually, we've got these X-Real AR glasses, so a little bit different from things like the Vision Pro, but it's like, it looks like a pair of Ray-Bans that you put on and you've got like a 130-inch screen in your face. Actually putting that on their heads and designing their shoes in that type of environment makes such a big difference to the wonder and the wow that they feel. So it's really about trying to work out how we can go from, yeah, I need a suit, measure me up, that fabric, yeah, it fits my budget, fine, whatever, you've measured me, got everything you need, okay, bye, I'll see you in 6 weeks, okay, fine, to really getting people to just to start sparking that magic within people, because everyone's capable of having that wonder.
No, of
course.
Just want
to invoke it, and I want to do that more with what we do, because there is so much, like, people take something that we've made for them, and by and large, it's like they don't really give it much of a second thought until someone compliments them, for example, and says, oh, right, you look amazing in that. And I might get a text message saying, hey, I got a compliment from someone randomly and that felt great. For 2 seconds, they forget about it again. It's evoking that wonder during the early part of the process that stays with them in the same way that you guys do with your chef's tables for people like me.
Sure. And you mentioned a key word there a few times, which is experimenting. Now, at Kitchen Theory, we're all about kind of experimenting and trying. How much, and you see, we're all about experimenting more so with our own chef's table, because we can afford to be a bit more experimental there than when we're doing client events and dinners, because obviously you're catering to their very specific requests. Given that everything that you do is bespoke, how much do you feel you get to experiment? How much do you feel that you get to try new things? And I guess that you're going to say, first of all, that depends on the client, I'm guessing, in terms of, but what does experimenting look like in your world?
So we can't really experiment on our customers because that's could be very, very expensive and disastrous as well. Because you put someone in something, they try it on for the first time, and you've taken a risk with it because it's a fabric that you don't know. You don't know how it's going to behave. Then you end up with a remake. It's a do-over, right?
Okay.
So our experimenting happens a lot earlier. So every season, thinking a season or two ahead, our wonderful partners at our mills will come up with some crazy stuff, like, suits that are water repellent, shirt fabrics that have got loads of stretching. So there was one shirt mill that created a fabric. They took the inspiration from the sportswear industry, like Lycra and stuff.
Yeah.
And they made shirts that looked like the shirt that you're wearing right now, but they had so much stretch in them. One of my clients is a judo instructor in his spare time. That's what he does, as extracurricular activities when he's not an accountant. And he throws people around. So I said to him, hey, can I make you a shirt and can you just wear it when you're doing one of your judo things that you do, throwing your students around and stuff? And he was like, are you mad? And I said, yeah, but just go with me here. It's not going to cost you anything. He wore this shirt. It was properly fitted. He wore this shirt and he wore it for an entire judo lesson thing in his dojo or whatever they call it. And he said to me, I can't feel it. Like, this is more comfortable than being in my ghee. Yeah. I always think of ghee as clarified butter, obviously from, and he was just amazed. So that was a product that did really, really well coming through COVID because everybody was at home on Zoom calls and stuff, getting fatter, being in shorts and t-shirts and things like that. And so everybody wanted shirts that they couldn't feel when they had them on. So that type of fabric did really, really well. But the experimenting comes to actually answer your question, when our mills sort of say, okay, we've got this coming down the pipeline. And then I'm like, okay, when can I get my hands on it so that I can make something for myself and test it out before our clients get to it? And we're not always perfect with it. We will have some fabrics that slip through that we've not tried before. And you're with a client and they're sort of like, what about that? And you're like, okay, well, look, I'm willing to give it a go if you are. We're going to be trying it out, and I'm not sure how it's going to react, but we 100% guarantee everything that we do. So if the client's not happy with something, to use a Michelin star chef thing, we don't stick your food in the microwave. We put it in the bin and we start again.
Yeah.
But yeah, the experimenting mostly will happen early on. So we have some new ranges coming for this winter that apparently have got a waterproof treatment to them, but they feel like a regular wool that hasn't had anything added to it. So they're literally on my desk right now to get those fabrics ordered, get some lengths in for myself to create some jackets and stuff. And then I'm gonna, the next rainy day that we get, after they're ready, I'm going to put them to the test and just walk out there without an umbrella and see if, water just repels off me.
Well, in a city like London, you're going to be inundated with orders for that. So, Roberto, when we have all our guests come into the studio, I always like to, I love playing around with generative AI, and I love kind of, conceptualizing dishes and menus and ideas. And every guest that we have come to join us on the podcast, I like to think, how could I take elements of who they are, their character, their work, and how could we reflect that in some way into an edible dish? This is what I enjoy doing in my spare time. So here I have for you the dish that we have created that is based on yourself and your work. So I'm going to talk you through it. So, Roberto, what you have here is you'll see that there's beautiful kind of structuring to the plate. I wanted something that had that kind of element of precision and structure there, because I can see that in the clothing that you put together. Then we have, as you can see, kind of layered through both the food, the plating, and even the backdrops. We have various textures. Again, this is kind of alluding to the textures and fabrics that you obviously work with. In terms of the ingredients, you can see that everything's kind of quite meticulously and orderly put together. And I thought that there's something about the craftsmanship and structure of what you have in your work that just, I felt that felt right for it. And then the main ingredient that we have there, the flavors, I want to take inspiration from your kind of part of your Spanish heritage. So we have some shrimp there and some vibrant colors as well, because if there's one thing that I've noticed in having met you a few times now in person, is that you do have an element of flair and color that you're daring with. Well, I say daring, but I mean that in the sense of, I think generally with men's suiting, people tend to play it very safe. And I'm definitely one of those people. I'm in either black suits, navy suits, gray suits, or slight variations within that, but that tends to be my lane. But I always find that you have lovely little accents of color and that you're bold in, I saw actually something that you did on Instagram where you were rolling up to your sleeves in a kind of 80s style. And I thought, oh, I like that, but I don't know if I'd have the guts to do it. But so I wanted to express some of that flair in this plate too.
Yeah. I mean, straight away, if you put that in front of me, it would be gone in about 5 seconds flat. The color, the flair thing, by the way, it goes against my natural self, believe it or not, because I'm actually naturally introverted.
Sure.
Says the guy who's got a podcast and now YouTube channel, all the rest of it. But it's a way of drawing people to me, because I'm not the sort of person that would go into a room full of people and, go and introduce myself and suddenly be the life and soul of the party and so on. I need to have something
that
in my...
surprises me, because I've met you in such social environments and you've always been someone who's going around and pretty much chatting to everyone. And you're almost like social glue in kind of when we've been out socially. I feel like, if anything, you're the person that brings people together.
So I need the trigger. So I need people to say something about something I'm wearing, which is why... So when the last time we saw each other, I was hosting that Founders Club dinner, Kitchen Theory, short notice, terrified, but said yes, because you answer the call when someone asks for help. So I wore I think I was wearing my orange linen jacket that evening, sleeves rolled up. Yeah. But the first thing people will say usually is they'll make a comment about that jacket, positive, that's great, it looks beautiful, whatever. And then that's the trigger that I need to then say, okay, I've got permission to now talk to this person. So they've initiated. I can't, it's very hard for me to initiate.
Okay.
The other part of it is that then what happens is, because of the way that that first person has reacted to what I'm wearing, then the superhero persona starts to formulate. And then that's where my confidence will start to grow. So I always talk about, when I've given talks and stuff, and I say to people, we've all got items of clothing or accessories that contain some weird power that when we put those things on, or we grab that bag or that pair of shoes or whatever, it's an energy giver, energy generator. Make sure that you have a space in your wardrobe reserved for your power givers. So there we go. But, normal me is quite happy to be left alone, doesn't want to actually talk to anybody, and just wants to be with his dogs out in the middle of the woods somewhere.
But so for all those people who do want to talk to you, Roberto, and want to possibly have wonderful clothing made for themselves, how can people find out more?
So you can simply search Roberto Revilla, and I will come up everywhere. Our website's robertorevillalondon.com. Follow me on Instagram at Roberto Revilla.
And you have a great, very active Instagram page.
Yeah. I try to do my little reels, teaching people about fashion stuff.
And what's the podcast? Just give us a quick idea on what you discuss on the podcast.
So the podcast is Tailoring Talk. I tailor the talk on that show. So we've recently just rebranded to the Tailoring Talk magazine on YouTube as well.
Okay.
I meet self-starters, creators. I need to get you on at some point. People who make things from nothing, basically, entrepreneurs. The podcast goal is to help people in whatever they might be going through in life at that point in time. So we've had conversations ranging from how to start a business to dealing with burnout, mental health, how to dress. And that's why we've added the magazine sort of thing to the name of the podcast and the YouTube channel. But it's a conversation podcast with different people from all sorts of walks of life. And the idea is that they come on and we try to find something that they're good at that I can take out of them to then put out there to help someone in the world that might need that thing at that moment in time.
Sure. Awesome. And where can we find the podcast as well? Is that
Everywhere.
everywhere?
So yeah, all major platforms. It's on YouTube, but it is on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere that you can get a podcast, it's there.
Awesome. Roberto, thank you so much for coming by the studio today. I always enjoy talking food and tailoring, and I love the products and clothes that you make. And it's been great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's honor and a privilege.